Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our half-day virtual mini conference on applying the safe system approach for rural. We'll give everybody about a minute or so to file into the room. We have a lot of participants today, and we look forward to getting started. I can see the room is filling up nicely. We have over 300 participants for this session today, which is excellent. So when we get to about 250 or so, I'll get started. We're picking up folks at a fast clip. Okay, we seem to be leveling off a bit, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome back to the half-day virtual mini conference to session 5, Safer Speeds in the Rural Context. My name is Cameron Eshok. I am the operations manager here at the National Center for Rural Road Safety, and I will be your host for this session. This session is co-hosted, importantly, by the Safety Work Group of the National LTAP Association. We've got a couple of things that, sorry, want to get a couple of things we want to go over about basic logistics. If you were with us earlier today for our excellent earlier session this morning, you will have seen this already. If you are interested in activating the closed captioning, it's right at the bottom of your screen under Show Captions. You can turn that off at any time using that same button. The recording of this webinar and the handouts will be available to you via download from our site. And I would ask that you focus any questions and answers that you have in the Q&A pod that is also in your control at the top there, rather than the chat. We're going to be having a lot of folks talking back and forth in the chat. It'll be an excellent place for us to share information and views. But if you have any specific questions for any of the presenters during their sessions, put them there. And at the end of each session, we're going to go back over those and give our presenters an opportunity to answer. Also very important that you fill out the feedback form that you'll get at the end of this session. This is really mission critical for us. It gives us an opportunity, for example, to figure out what future program topics we can cover in events like these. So please do take advantage of that. If you are also knowledgeable of some of the other media that our center puts out, we have an excellent podcast series, the Home Safely podcast. Some of you may have heard Holly Kay speak at presentations and conferences around the country. She is a passionate and committed speaker with a very personal connection to road safety. This is a great resource to catch up on the latest issues and folks in the rural safety community. We've got 9 other podcasts loaded up and many more to come. So please give that a listen when you get a chance. Also, want to give you a heads up on one of our flagship activities here at the Center, Rural Road Safety Awareness Week. As always, it will be this year again during the 3rd week of July. And as you can see, we have outdone ourselves once again with an excellent theme of a sort of video game theme covering the rural modes and some really solid and interesting daily topics. We hope that you will participate, and if you are representing a local public agency, consider participating by getting a proclamation signed by your elected officials and sharing this information through your social media networks. Some federal and FHWA updates. The next in the Rural Road Safety webinar series is 3 weeks from today on innovative funding practices. You get a chance there to hear from state, regional, and local agencies on a range of options and strategies open to you to find, secure, and implement road safety funding. So definitely give that a listen or an opportunity if you can. Also important to note that the next round of SS4A grants are out on both the FHWA website and on grants.gov. Through the first 4 rounds, SS4A has provided nearly $4 billion in federal funding to over 2,000 communities to help reduce fatalities and serious injuries on our roadway. Again, an excellent opportunity for your government agency to get some needed funds to attend to that problem. So we hope you'll take a look at that as well. Finally, the 2026 nominations for the Build a Better Mousetrap program are being accepted. You'll access those through your local LTAP or regional TTAP center. It's a great opportunity to share any innovations you may have come across in your neck of the woods that can help improve safety and a range of other topics in your transportation programs. Those nominations are due in about 5 weeks, so please do reach out to your local LTAP or TTAP center for information on how to apply. And of course, each year, the best of those innovations are captured by FHWA in a document that is shared globally. Please go back and look at those from previous years. You might find something that is useful to your local public agency or your work. Really pleased today to be leading this session on safer speeds in a rural context. We've got an excellent slate of presenters. In line with the safe system approach, achieving safe speeds really means a comprehensive strategy that incorporates how we design the roads, what other infrastructure we put in place, how we set speed limits, in addition to things like education and enforcement. I'm proud to say that in this portion of the conference, you're going to learn about some examples of this specifically for the rural context, including topics like why safer speeds are important and examples of countermeasures to use for speed management. You're going to get an overview of Operation Southern Slowdown, which involves both a public awareness campaign and high visibility enforcement. And also through an example at Washington, the Washington State DOT, why and how to use land use and road design to achieve safer speed. So it should be an excellent slate of presenters. Really looking forward to it. First up is Andi Bill. Andi is the director of the Wisconsin Local Technical Assistance Program, or LTAP. She is also the associate director of the Traffic Operations and Safety Laboratory, as well as the Eastern Tribal Technical Assistance Program, or TTAP, all of those at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. With these roles, she has been bringing research to technology transfer through in-person and virtual webinars throughout Wisconsin and across the country. She focuses on safe system, human factors, traffic operations, work zone design, incident management, roadway lighting, engineering ethics, connected and automated vehicles, and traffic safety, which is an awful lot, Andi. She is a passionate advocate for making research tangible to practitioners and to foster implementation and widespread adoption. She is actively involved in TRB, ITE, the Association of Traffic Safety Information Professionals, and the American Society of Engineering Education. With that, Andi, take it away.
Thank you so much. Sorry, you guys, for that large bio of mine. Cameron, thanks for having me here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Those of you guys who might have heard me speak before, I get very passionate talking about data and looking at all of this. So as we get going here, I might talk a little fast. I'm going to try to slow myself down and get through it. I have a lot of fun things I want to cover today. But I think as we think about safer speeds in rural context, everybody who's on here has been in a situation like this. This is actually a road that's just from nearby my farm, and looking out of it, it is one of our most beautiful areas that we have, but also some of our most dangerous areas. So, as we think about this, and again, I'm sure I'm speaking to already a group that already has very much passion about this and being able to look at it. But we know that the greater the speed, the lower the survivability of the crashes. And then we want to be able to think through that. As we think about our rural roads, we have very large different types of vehicles that operate at different speeds and different factors. We have motorcyclists, so very low profile. We have our agricultural vehicles that are very slow that are looking at it. Our roadway conditions vary from state to state and location to location. Sometimes we might have cornfields that are blocking our way. We might have some mountainous terrain and everything in between. So this limits our sight distance as well as then being able just to have that kind of consistency amongst everything that we're doing. As we know from all of the wonderful data that the National Center for Rural Road Safety puts out, we know that rural roads account for a disproportionate share of fatal crashes. And we know that speed is a primary severity for that driver. It's not just a behavioral issue, but it goes along with it. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing in Wisconsin and other states as well as the countermeasures that kind of go along with it. I know that you guys have all seen this. Um, I am getting a note that so let me mix up it all from our safe system that it's about physics, right? By the way, if you don't tell your kids that the sign for the work zone is the person feeding the well, you're welcome. You'll never be able to see that again and see it the same again with it. Two folks around the state and quadruples. We think about it, we want to think about how we talk about this. What is the discussion that goes along with it? And what I always talk about, then and this hits it more in our urbans and things of that sort, that if I am traveling an hour and I don't seek out on that roadway, I am traveling at a lot lower at that 20 miles an hour, I have a 5% chance. And again, how we talk about this, how we have the common language, words matter. It's important. It's not my car hitting the pedestrian, it's myself driving and the speeds that I'm driving at and what is the effect on others. I do know that it is not possible to have 20 miles an hour on all of our rural roadways, but where does it make sense as we're looking at those safety and those risks that go along with it? One of the big factors in being able to look at speeds and better understand it is understanding the data. This is a map of the state of Wisconsin. It's through our community maps. We have all of our strategic highway safety plan flags as our, emphasis areas as flags. In just 2025, speed was a factor in 16,559 crashes that claimed 181 lives. As we are getting towards zero deaths and zero in Wisconsin, we have to do better when it comes to speed on our roadways. When we look at the actual speed on our roadways, we have a lot of continuous data counters throughout the state. What we see here is roughly 3 out of every 4 vehicles are above the posted speed limit. Digging into that a little bit more, where does that break down, right? And so we'll have a lot of discussion. I have a whole speed soapbox, so bear with me here on this one. Is that the speed, especially in Wisconsin, the speed limit is the maximum amount. So I know we do, okay, well, 5 miles an hour, Andy, is okay, and it's 9 is fine, 10 you're mine from a law enforcement perspective. But again, if we're just looking at the data, we see here in 2022, 76% of our vehicles were over the speed limit. When we look at our 20 plus, and again, limited data because of some of the information that goes along with it, you do see that spike in that COVID timeframe, but you see we're right back down to that 1.74% of that on that large side. So at least in my area, it's how do we start to think about not just that excessive speed, right? We always get into this, well, Andy, I'm a very good driver. It's not my fault. I can travel safe at 5 miles an hour over or 10 miles an hour over. It's those people that are always excessive speeding that's causing the problems. And we have to look at it, yes, they are, but it's also all of us that goes along with it. And how do we look at that culture that we kind of have that component to it? Um, so I'm going to go on a little bit. We're going to think about that excessive speeding in the back of our mind, but I want to kind of just set that aside for right now and just talk about our everyday life and things that we can do and look at it. Um, I've had the opportunity to do this same sort of, I did a Mentimeters to a lot of different groups. We did it to different types of judges, driver education teachers, engineers, law enforcement educators, and analysts, and asked them their opinions about speeding and what they thought about it. We asked questions such as, at 25 miles an hour, if the speed limit's 25 miles an hour, at what speed do you normally travel at? It's anonymous, so they felt comfortable at least giving their answers. Um, a little bit of a shot to the heart was that, no one said that they traveled right at the speed limit. At the 25 miles an hour, people felt pretty comfortable going about that 5 to 7 miles an hour over. When we got up to our interstates at 70 miles an hour, people felt pretty comfortable going 12 to 15 miles an hour over. Well, we looked at it, depending on, it didn't matter about your background, but speed perception varied by audience. So we did see a public versus professionals. Overall, people underestimated the risk at moderate speeding levels, right? So again, it's my old age is showing. You guys can't see my picture here, my gray hair, but it's kind of that Rain Man syndrome of, I'm a very good driver, Andy. It's everybody else that's causing it. I feel like I'm very competent at that speeds where I can do it, not understanding the full data back about it and looking at it. There was definitely a stronger support for safety messaging. And then again, this behavioral gap between the knowledge and those driving habits. Again, people say, oh, I understand the data, but I still travel at 5 miles an hour over, things of that sort. I'm getting to the right screen. Okay. We ask people why they speed. And again, this is from a group, was a word cloud for it. You can see people are comfortable, flow of traffic, hurry, late. It didn't matter the group. The reasons were all about the same. I get into it a lot of times of, well, Andy, I have to keep up with traffic because I'm going to get run over. And this is usually where I have law enforcement in the room, and they say, I've never seen anybody get fully run over from going too slow. There's other issues that might happen, but then we have to figure out how do we balance that, right? So, how do we think about this change, especially in our rural areas? When we have this situation saying, okay, how do we have these discussions? How do we start to say, why do we speed and what can we do and what is the effect on others? So again, time management. We know that it saves mere minutes by speeding. I've been working on a graphic that shows like a 5 minutes. If you're, if you're able to save, go 5 miles an hour over, what is that increase of risk that you save by, for an hour travel going, saving 2 minutes or 3 minutes? What does that happen? The reality is that we're all in a hurry for just about anything, right? So I can think about just my latest trip to Costco and how I kind of glanced to see what was the shortest line, and I moved over to that, and then another line went, and I went a little faster, and I wondered, do I switch lanes? And so this idea, and again, it's a cultural shift to say we just need to understand the risks associated. If I cut somebody off at the Costco line, probably not a huge deal. But being able to think about when we cut somebody off on our rural roadways, when we have our agricultural equipment out there, or those large, slow trucks, or when we have some of our pedestrians and bicyclists out there, how do we make sure that people are understanding what they expect to be able to see? So most respondents, as we saw here on our our slide decks that we went through, is most respondents underestimated how quickly crash severity increased with speed. And then this moderate speeding, the 5 to 10 miles an hour, is often viewed as low risk and high reward versus that shifting around of it, that it is a risk that's going out with that. And so being able to look through that. We know that there's a strong awareness that speed contributes to crashes in both our urban and our rural areas, but the self-reported behaviors don't align with that knowledge. So again, that cultural normalization of speeding. And I know as we talk about the safe system approach and all of the wonderful podcasts that the center puts out and everything else is looking at, is how do we start to understand that speeding is a problem and that we need to look at it. And it's not just the 20 miles an hour over the speed limits, but it's the 5 and 10 miles an hour over as well too, and making sure we're setting our speed limits correctly. So what we saw here, and again, it was interesting on my perspective, safety professionals kind of showed a little bit of a higher risk. It was not statistically significant. The general audiences showed more tolerance for speeding, But the judicial perspectives were pretty interesting. They said as we were going through this that they didn't fully understand what happened when they downgraded the tickets from that high speed to that low speed and what that changed a little bit. And so they kind of had that highlighting enforcement and that consequences gap for it. And how do they get some of the information and how do they play a role in our safe system approach? And we're going to hear a little bit later on about land use. And as we think about our rural areas, it's also about our judicial system as well. We talk a lot about our post crash care. We can also talk about that as impacts afterwards with regards to that. Higher speeds, longer emergency response times in our rural areas. We talk about those wide lanes, those clear zones, which again, we're balancing the act of we want to make sure if somebody runs off the road that they're able to get off the road safely and soundly and come back on. But then what does that change when we have people that are very willing to speed on those roadways? And there's lower perception of where enforcement is going to be, right? So it's more of a reactive cultural component to it with regards to safety, not a proactive standpoint about their behavior. And then understanding the familiar roads and understanding that, okay, I know that I never see anybody on this roadway, so I can kind of go over that center line and kind of, utilize these curves like a racetrack is out there as well too. So we definitely have a lot of specific challenges that we need to look at, and we'll go through some of those countermeasures here in just a second. So we talked about, how do we shift that awareness to get that behavioral change, target the perception of acceptable speeding. My own soapbox here is that I'd love to talk about survivable speed out there for folks to fully understand it, that the speed limit isn't just an option, it is a survivable speed that goes along with it, which helps us reinforce that safe system. When humans make mistakes, they should not be fatal. And then aligning all of the messaging together. So what we did from these conversations that happened over about 2 years is we started looking at those actionable steps to do work in our rural areas. So integrating those findings into our local road safety plans, looking at speed management countermeasures, both from a behavioral and an enforcement standpoint and an engineering standpoint. We targeted the education and outreach, and then we used the data to do that storytelling to shift that culture for folks to understand. We're still working on that. One of those examples, and those of you guys who might be familiar with the Midwest, there is a town called Rosendale. It is a city. It was a direct route that you had to go from Madison to Green Bay, where the Green Bay Packers are. It is a rural community. They are known for their speed traps, is what they call it. It is not. They've just done a very active change in their culture. It came from the businesses and the residents that were there. They even sell T-shirts that say just the ticket, and these are sold at the gas stations. It is well known. It's been on national news before. What happened is the residents said there was a fatal crash. They said this is unacceptable in our town. We want people to slow down. So then they brought in extra clerks into the judicial side and said, okay, we are not going to have a tolerance. We are going to prosecute. We're going to write tickets and prosecute, and we're going to change the culture around this. And when I moved to Wisconsin, 20 plus years ago. Again, there's my gray hair showing. 20 plus years ago, I was told do not speed through Rosendale, not even a mile an hour over. And it was pretty amazing that I never saw cops for the first, 10 years or so. And I've just recently seen cops back out there again. So it is sustainable. They've changed the culture. They've had the conversation that goes out just past Rosendale to everybody else that travels through it and continuing this. So it is possible to change the culture. This is just one example. I'm sure you guys on this call have other examples and would love to see it on the chat as well too, of this type of community change that goes along with it. We know that compliance can be achieved through multiple different ways. It's having active law enforcement in your rural areas. How are you going to talk about it? What are we going to look at with it? And there's that accountability that we have to talk about. Safety cameras are, each state's a little bit different in what they can do and what they can't do a little bit about it. In Wisconsin, it is not allowed, but it's definitely a conversation we continue to have. As we move into our engineering countermeasures, and I know we're going to say, well, Andi, this is a run off the road. We already saw a Safer Roads presentation about this that the center put out. And, how are we thinking about this with regards to speeding? And as I mentioned, that we do see drivers that kind of hug that center line a little bit so they can go a little bit faster with it. Putting out our rumble strips helps the vehicle, then the driver feel a little bit more narrow and help kind of slow them down a little bit. If you have a large enough shoulder, like in that first picture there on the left-hand side, if you do have bikes there, it's kind of a little bit safer on the other side of it. So these are our options that are out there. curve warning signs. It's important that as drivers are coming up to it and we're looking at the different visibilities, the picture in the middle there shows kind of that reflective stripe down the post. There's been some studies that show that it also not only helps drivers understand the speed that they should be going through that curve, but also maybe helps some of our impaired drivers because it's a little bit closer to that roadway and looking at it on that side. So this is really important for our improving the recognition of what's happening out there. It's critical on curves and the information with it. High friction surface treatment, right? So another great everyday counts initiative that have been over the years of looking at it, of saying, okay, in our areas where, again, we're looking at the data, we're trying to get that speed limit set correctly. We're still seeing some issues on speeding. Do we need a little bit more grip out there? And so we can target that high risk areas based off of that crash data and based off that speed data that goes along with it. Speed feedback signs. I know this is a debate back and forth about how it can be used. At least in my rural customers that I talk to, they have found it really helpful. And it's maybe just you're not going to have that large halo effect all over the neighborhood or all over the roadway, but it's going to be very active in that specific place that you want that speed reduction. A lot of these trailers and information with that also collect data. So it's getting you this information. I had an example of a sheriff that said they could see about 2 o'clock every weekday. There was a car that was going through at about 120 miles an hour over. And they said, well, that seemed maybe it was a glitch for a couple days. And then they said, okay, well, we're just going to assign an officer out there. And there was somebody who was coming home from work that always sped on that roadway. And so they were able to, again, utilize the data, look at it. They couldn't give the ticket based off of what they saw from the data, but they could know when to enforce and what they should be looking for with regards to that. So again, another helpful piece in being able to look at that. We can't have enforcement everywhere in our rural areas, but are there ways to do some targeted enforcement based off of some of this data and some of this analysis? In a lot of our rural areas, we go from a rural highway into a more city or village or town or things of that sort. There's different options to be able to transition to a lower speed roadway. We can do some roundabouts, we can do some signage. There's some elongated pavement markings and other options, chicanes that are out there on that. So as you're thinking about your roadways, again, those 2-lane rural roadways are out there. And as we're transitioning to something that we know that we're going to have a lot more interaction with our pedestrians and our bicyclists, how do we transition and look at those options? Take a deep breath. I get really excited about this stuff. There's lots of technology out there. And so as we think about this and looking forward to the future with regards to this and being able to say, how does this work? There are active and passive intelligent speed assists that are out there. There are different examples of this. There have been different studies that have been done nationwide with regards to this. There's also just cities and towns that are looking at slower speeds in general. So I know that the top right picture there is as a city of Madison. It's part of the Vision Zero. And so 20 is plenty is their tagline. Slower is safer. And again, this came from neighbors. This came from the residents to say, we want to make our roads safer. So how do we do that? Are they seeing all of the vehicles down to 20 miles an hour yet? No. Are we seeing a statistical significant decrease of about 3 to 5 miles an hour over the previous years? Yes, and it continues to go down. So we're seeing that decrease. So I know it's easy. Well, Andy, we can just put up signs. No one's going to listen to it. But again, over time, changing that culture along with the enforcement, the engineering, and the education changes that culture that goes along with it. The other option is looking at different pieces of technology. So we've got a couple of different options that are out there. There's a Safe Roads Challenge that we use in Wisconsin for our teen drivers. There is the picture on the right, which is from my niece's boyfriend as he traveled. So I'm the head coach of the UW equestrian team. We're actually in North Carolina for nationals this weekend, so super excited about that. But one thing is that they know what I do for a living, and we talk about safety, and I talk about how much I care about them. So this app on the right is Life 360. All of my team members have, they have decided there was no requirement to be on the team, but they've decided to share their 360 with me, and so we can have this active dialogue through technology that when I see them speeding, like I did for my niece's boyfriend here, and I see it, then we can have a discussion about why, what was happening, things of that sort. So, the education now turns into The data turns into education, and then it gives us a chance to kind of hold that accountability along with it to again change that culture that goes along with it. So I know a lot of us, especially in our rural areas, we wear multiple hats. And so, what else is in that sphere of influence that Jay talks about a lot of saying, what else can we do to change and be able to work with that? So I'm doing pretty good here on time. I was trying to get to that 20 minutes. I know you'll see the slides are a lot here, but I want to just talk about before we get into our two other speakers is the bottom line is speed's not just a behavior. It is a system failure point that we have to do better about. We can do that from many different ways, right? And it does take, like safe system, it takes every piece to be able to address that. It takes our safe users, our vehicles, our roads, making sure our speed limits are set correctly, and then that post-crash care side so that we help changing that perception to be able to change those outcomes. Because we know that if we can get those speeds down to more manageable levels, to get those survivable levels, we will have safer rural communities. So with that, I'm going to leave my contact information up and I will if there are any questions, Cameron, I am open to some options.
Excellent job, Andy. Great. Yes, and we do have a couple of questions. So, in the interest of time, I'll get right to those. One question was when you were talking early on in your presentation about speed as a factor, were you considering, is it considered excessive speed or simply over the limit? And in that vein, is it a question of whether the limit itself was appropriate and appropriately set or overly restrictive?
Yeah, that's a great question. For the actual speed data questions, we looked at just over the limit and that excessive speed. With regards to our crash flag in our crash database, we look at a combination of things. We look at the citations that go along with it, and then the factor from a technical reconstruction unit is. So it's usually both over the speed limits on that side. We have done very limited work with regards to then if we're seeing a cluster of those speed related to then go back and look at that speed limit setting. It hasn't been done too much at this point in time, but that's a great question that we could look at with that data.
I'm going to lump two of these questions together, both again on this on the speed side. The difference in on your excessive speed slide, the difference between the years was pretty close. Is that a statistically significant difference, or are they just different and higher? And then, kind of concurrent to that, how do prevailing speeds decrease when the design of the road promotes higher speeds?
Say that last question for me again, Cameron. I think I missed that. How
No
does
worries. How do prevailing speeds for drivers decrease when the design of the road promotes higher speeds?
okay. So in terms of the statistical changes with regards to it, we haven't done a very thorough analysis at that point in time. As you saw, 2020 is definitely a little bit of a difference there. And so we've kind of always thrown that out of our analysis and looking at it. So we can continue to look at those excessive speed limits on that side. In terms of breaking down those speeds with regards to the functional classification and things of that sort, that is something we haven't done yet, but I think that that is a great next step for us to look at with regards to speeding and that prevailing speed versus the design speed and then versus that speed limit on it. I think that's a great next step that we can do. So whoever wrote that, thank you for that next research idea. I really appreciate it.
Final one, Andy. This is something that I've kind of noticed myself, although with different permutations. Someone wrote in that they noticed that when you use Apple Maps to calculate your ETA, it assumes you'll be speeding, but that when you go the speed limit, it keeps adding time to your ETA, even though there's no traffic. And the poster says it's not really a question, but he'd be interested to see how those kinds of platforms, nav platforms, Waze, et cetera, impact people's likelihood of speeding.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually one that with the psychology department at the university, something we've looked into of like a Myers-Briggs test of, the really competitive nature folks when it comes out in your kind of your characteristics and then people that like to try to beat the Google Maps and what does that play in terms of a risk factor and things of that sort. So I agree with you. I think that, again, technology is very helpful, but it's also interesting to see the people that try to beat the map or when it goes up and they feel like they've done something wrong, right? We get into that kind of that behavioral impact of onto us a little bit. And so it's always it's one of the reasons why I love traffic safety and traffic engineering so much is it's this kind of this interaction between all the things that we do and what that plays into an individual's kind of perception and reality of themselves and the world.
Great, Andy. Thank you so much. And thank you for an excellent presentation. We're going to transition now to Brent Kelly. Brent is the Special Programs Director for the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs in the South Carolina Department of Public Safety. Brent began his law enforcement career in the year 2000 with the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office before joining the South Carolina Highway Patrol in 2007. He served 4 years as a road trooper before transitioning to the Community Relations Unit. And in 2013, he moved to the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs as a law enforcement liaison. In 2020, he was promoted to Special Programs Director, where he oversees the Law Enforcement Support Services section, the Traffic Records section, and the South Carolina Law Enforcement Officers Hall of Fame. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Ashworth College. Brent, welcome.
There we go. All right. Good evening. Can everybody see my screen okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see your screen.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon. It's good to be here. Thank y'all for allowing me to be a part of your mini conference today, coming to you from the great state of South Carolina over here on the East Coast, where finally we got some rain this morning. I don't know if the rest of the country is experiencing what we've been experiencing over here, but we were able to get a little bit of rain this morning. Very thankful for that. But again, it's an honor to be with you today. It's an honor to be a part of this mini conference to share some things and of what we're doing out here in South Carolina. And I was asked to be a part of your conference to share with you a campaign that we do yearly here in South Carolina, and um, it's called Operation Southern Slowdown. Now, for those, if you're not familiar with it, I'm not sure if anybody is on this conference from this part of the country or from our region, but just to give you a little back history of Operation Southern Slowdown. When we first started Southern Slowdown, it was actually called Operation Southern Shield. We started this campaign back in 2017 when, at the time, our NHTSA Region 4 Administrator, Ms. Carmen Hayes, um, came to all 5 states out here in Region 4 and said that we have a speed problem, in our part of the country, and we needed to do something about it. So there again, this is it's not a national campaign when it first started, and it's still not a national campaign. It's still just right here in our NHTSA region, and so all 5 states participate in this. So it's not only just South Carolina; it includes Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and also Tennessee. And like I said, so it's a yearly campaign that we always do in July. We always do it the third full week of July is when we do it. And so we kick it off on that Monday. And this year it'll be July 13th is when we'll kick it off. And whenever we start this campaign that week, that Monday, we at 10 o'clock in the morning, all 5 states will do a media event somewhere in their state. And we usually partner with Georgia, and we will do 2 press events with the state of Georgia, and we do them on 2 of our major interstate corridors, I-20 down in the Augusta area, and then we'll do one down on I-95 down around Savannah. And then, like I said, also Florida, Tennessee, and Alabama do those as well, and they'll partner with each other and their neighboring states and do the same thing. And so after we do those press events, basically kicking off this Operation Southern Slowdown, kicking off this campaign that we do, and then we go out and do enforcement, and we set up a weekly schedule. And on this weekly schedule, we'll create the schedule for our law enforcement partners in the state. And one day we might focus and concentrate on interstates. One day we might focus on our U.S. highways. One day, and then so on and so on. But one thing we did in South Carolina, the first year that we did this in 2017, is we just mainly focused on our interstates because according to the data at that time, that's where most of our serious injuries and fatalities involving speed were happening, was on our major interstates. So that's really where we focused our time and our efforts and our enforcement events the first year we ever did this campaign. But then looking at it after that, South Carolina, we decided that we wanted to open up and we wanted to include all of our law enforcement partners because we have a lot of agencies and a lot of jurisdictions that don't have major interstates that run through their jurisdictions. And so even though we focused on the interstates. After looking at the data, we realized that, just like everybody else in the country, speed is not just on the interstates. It's on all of the roadways, whether it's just a secondary road, whether it's a SC highway, whether it's a US highway, or anything. So the next year in 2018, we changed it. We still focused on the interstates as well, but we also opened it up for all of our law enforcement partners to participate, for them to be a part of it. So it's been a successful campaign. And I think, at the time when we started this, there was really, unless I'm wrong, somebody can remind me and correct me if I am, but we really didn't have a national campaign regarding speed, unless states did stuff on their own. But over the last couple of years, 3, 4, so many years, NHTSA has really started pushing stuff out too, as far as like a national campaign regarding speed as well. And it's also during the month of July. So, but this campaign is very successful for us. But how do we, like I said, we started it because at the time, in 2017, our region was the top region in the country regarding speed. And so, based off of that, just like Andi just presented to us, in her presentation, a lot of the stuff that we do is based off of data, and I know everybody around the country does that. So, that's what we do. So we got problem identification that we do. That's where, and we're lucky here in South Carolina, we have our statisticians that are housed right here in the same office that I am. So we're very fortunate to be able to work so close with our statisticians, because our office, the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs, we are the keepers of crash data for the state of South Carolina. So it is right here in house, and we don't have to go out and look for it, search for it, and all of that. We just walk right down the hallway and be able to get that. So we use problem identification, just like I'm sure everybody else does. So we create these heat maps, these hot maps, and look at where our problem areas are and all of that. And then we use the countermeasure selection. What can we do? What can we use to be able to, countermeasure against the problems that we have? And then, we use that to put out these summer safety tips that we do, because we also have the 100 Deadly Days of Summer. And that runs from Memorial Day to Labor Day. And I'm sure a lot of other states may not call it the 100 Deadly Days of Summer, but may know what I'm talking about and have something similar to that. But we just use these different travel tips, for that, to be able to share and put that information out. And then we take this problem identification and these countermeasure selection, and then we include it all into our fact book. And that's where we evaluate the data. We evaluate, the crash data in the state, and then we publish it to let everybody, in South Carolina and whoever else wants it, be able to see, where our problem areas are, and they can use that and be able to take it to their own jurisdiction or do whatever they can and create and maybe implement their own plan, or maybe implement their own campaign and be able to target the areas that they are seeing or having issues with in their jurisdiction as well. So in 2025, these numbers are preliminary, but as you can see, we had roughly 136,000 collisions, 945 fatalities, 16,000 DUI citations, 63,000 seatbelt citations, and 245,000 speeding citations. Again, these are just rough numbers that I wanted to share with you. But one thing, that we don't, I think, where we fail a lot, is whenever we're talking and we're trying to educate the public and talk to the public, about, highway safety and things like that, is we fail to share the economic cost that involves in a crash. And that's one thing I encourage my guys to, whenever they're doing a safety presentation or have the opportunity to talk to somebody, is to include this, because I think this is a big eye opener. Because people just look at the crash data and they think, okay, unfortunately, somebody was seriously injured, or unfortunately, if somebody loses their life, but they don't look at the overall picture. And, economic costs, that includes medical bills, vehicle property damage, hospital costs, lost wages, decreased productivity, legal insurance fees, societal burdens, public health support, long-term disability, things like that. And as you can see, the 2025 preliminary numbers for that was $6 billion. And I think, like I said, that's a real big eye opener for a lot of people, because they don't look at the cost involving a collision or anything like that. So that's what we try to also implement, or not implement, but share any chance that we get as well. And so looking at some crash data trends for us here in South Carolina, as you can see, we went all the way back to 2014 to share with you, just to show what we've done over the years. And, of course, 2014, 823, and then we saw an increase, from there up. But in 2021, we saw our highest number of fatalities on record for the state of South Carolina. And so this is also, and then after 2021, it starts decreasing a little bit. I've also included the serious injury graph there for you as well. So it's almost, the graph is almost identical, as we all know, and I'm sure your graphs and your data are probably similar too for your serious injuries and fatalities. But as you can see, we have started doing better over the last couple of years. And but 2021, I think everybody had a problem that year. At least I know our part of the country had problems that year regarding fatalities and serious injuries, and just an increase in everything, because we all know why. If y'all dealt with the same thing that we dealt with whenever COVID hit in 2020, and I hate to keep bringing that up because I'm really about tired of talking about COVID, but for us, that was the issue, and that's why we saw the increase in 2021. And the reason being is because a lot of our agencies were told, only do traffic enforcement on those major violations. So, and so I think a lot of people, like I said, in our part of the country was doing the same thing, and that's why we saw that increase during that time frame. So as far as our traffic fatalities, we are third in total fatalities, and this is one per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. So that's what we compare this to. And this is nationwide. So South Carolina, we're ranked third in total fatalities. We are ranked first in alcohol impaired driving fatalities. We are first in speed related deaths, third in pedestrian deaths, eighth in roadway departure deaths, eighth in intersection related deaths, and ninth in unbelted occupant deaths. And again, that is based off the 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And, it's always good to be in the top, in a lot of categories, but, these are categories that we're not very fond of, and we don't like being in the top of. So again, this is another reason why, Operation Southern Slowdown is very important to us as well, to encourage our law enforcement partners in the state to, and we always tell them, and we always encourage them, don't just focus on, I know this campaign is only for a week, but we always encourage them, don't stop during that week. This is something that we just need to continue to do throughout the year. We still need to work together and partner together to keep up with the speed enforcement throughout the year, because we want these numbers. We don't want to be at the top in these categories. So we use a lot of our strategies based off of our strategic highway safety plan, which is what Andi mentioned as well. She mentioned that in her presentation. So we do the same thing, I think, just like a lot of the other states do. And so I'm not going to sit here and bore you on the SHSP, because everybody has one, everybody's familiar with it. But that's basically, we use that and share that with the public and share that with our stakeholders as well. And we partner with them, whether it's DOT, whether it's the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DOT on the engineering aspect and things, but also just get with them and be able to become partners, keep that partnership with them to help maintain our roads and help make our roadways safer. We do that by using this plan. So our top crash factors for fatal and serious injury crashes in South Carolina, as you can see, speed is at the top, like I just mentioned in a couple of slides prior to this. So 5 years of crash data were examined, focusing on fatal and serious injury crashes for the top factors. The factors are our emphasis areas. The overlap in contributing factors, which total more than annual fatality and serious injury counts, because crash can have more than one factor, and we all know that. And speed is our number 2 emphasis area, and is also the area with the greatest potential from a safe system approach, because the number of countermeasures available from education, engineering, and the enforcement component. And this is the same as the previous slide that you just saw. It's just shown in a different way. All right, so it may be easier to understand, it may be easier to look at, simpler to look at this way, but it's basically the same slide that I just showed you right before this, and explained that one to you. So speeding. So definition is what? Driving while exceeding the authorized speed limit. Andi covered the same thing. She shared the same thing in her presentation. But in South Carolina, 4 out of 10 fatal crashes involve speeding. As you can see here, the total number of crashes from year to year, and then the orange graph is the percentage that involves, that is the fatal involved in those crashes. So Andi shared pretty much something similar to this in hers when we're talking about the stopping distance related to speed. At 20 miles an hour, the risk of pedestrian injury is 8%. At 40 miles per hour, the risk is 40%. And at 60 miles per hour, the risk is nearly 100%. So the safest vehicles can provide injury protection to car riders in frontal collisions at around 70 miles per hour and in side impact collisions at around 50 for those wearing their seatbelts. So the safety features that a lot of the companies and a lot of the manufacturers are putting in vehicles now is definitely safety features for the occupants inside the vehicle, but we have to think about those other types of roadway users outside of the vehicle. And, so we got to look out for those vulnerable roadway users on our highways as well. And that is including our pedestrians, our bicyclists, our motorcyclists, and things of that nature. And what we consider in our other category, whether it's, e-bikes or, golf carts or, things like that. So speed can come into play involving those vulnerable roadway users as well. So more than half of speed-related fatality and serious injury crashes occur at night in South Carolina. And why? Because it's low visibility and high speeds make reacting to roadway hazards more difficult and more dangerous. Speed-related fatalities and serious injury crashes overlap the most with the following four emphasis areas. Lane departure, which is for South Carolina, 65.9%. Unrestrained is 38.7%. And our young drivers is 30.4%, and unimpaired users is 24.9%. So you take those top four out that and include speeding in that, and those are all related to our fatality and serious injury crashes on our highways. So what everybody wants to know, all right, we do this campaign, we do it yearly. We've been doing it for almost 10 years now. Does it work? All right. So our crash evaluation of Operation Southern Slowdown. So we went back 3 years. I did 23, 24, 25, just to have a comparison to show you. And for South Carolina total crashes, that first graph you see right there. So we did see a decrease in total crashes during the enforcement period in 23 and 25. And it declined. The decline continued in after period in 2025. So after the campaign was over, we still saw a decrease in South Carolina total crashes after the campaign period was over with. And then the graph on the right, the South Carolina speed-related crashes, we saw the same thing. We did see a decrease in speed-related crashes during the enforcement period in 23 and 25. And then also that decline continued after 2025. So for those 2 years, yes, the campaign, we felt that it did work. People were out there listening to us. They were paying attention. The blue lights turned on the side of the road did make a difference. Now, in 2024, unfortunately, we saw an increase, and I'm sure there's probably somebody asking, well, why? Why did we see an increase? Well, don't know. I really can't answer that. I went back and I tried to put my brain in gear and think about, okay, did we have a something going on during that time frame? Did we have a major storm that might have came through in 2024 during that time frame that pulled a lot of our officers off of the street? Well, not off of the street, but pulled them into another direction where they had to go and be assigned to do something else. Was it a trend that we saw, across the region? And, I really went back and looked. I don't know if y'all remember the Hurricane Helene that we had. I thought maybe that might have been around that time, but it wasn't. But anyway, to stop babbling, I could not find anything to a reason why we would see an increase in 2024 during Operation Southern Slowdown. And so I really can't answer why we saw that increase there. But overall, in 23, as you see here on the slide, in our interstate crashes, we saw a 13% reduction in total crashes. We saw a 22% reduction in speed-related crashes. And in 2025, we saw 11% reduction in total crashes, and we saw a 16% reduction in speed-related crashes. But like I said, unfortunately, in 24 is where we saw that increase, where 25% in total and 49% in speed related. And again, I wish I could answer that for you and tell you why it increased, but I can't. But overall, for the last 3 years, we will take that, decrease in 23 and 25, and hopefully we'll continue in 2026 whenever we do this campaign here again in July. And then on our South Carolina and U.S. roadways, there again, in 2023, we saw a 6% reduction in total crashes on our U.S. and SC routes and a 16% reduction in speed-related crashes. Now, also here in 2025, we did see an increase on these two roadways. So there again, it could have been that some of our agencies, like I said, if they were not out there focusing on the major highways, on the major interstate, on these US and SC routes that run through their jurisdiction, maybe those agencies just were not able to be participate with us last year during that time. Maybe they had other stuff going on. They were not able to participate during the campaign. Those are just some of the contributing factors that I can think of that could have happened for this increase to take place during this time. But there again, we will move forward in 2026 and we will continue with the campaign, and we will still encourage and partner with our law enforcement partners to stay out there and help us with this important campaign and this important message. I'm going the wrong way. I'm sorry. So how do we compare? Well, let me go back because I skipped one. And then the crash evaluation of Operation Southern Slowdown. These are on our county crashes. So these are going to be our secondary roadways, not our major roadways. And then, and there again in 2023, we did see an increase on our county roadways, 13% and 12%. But in 2024, we saw a mixture. We saw a reduction in our crashes, but we saw an increase in our speed-related crashes. And then in 2025, we did see that reduction in both categories and in both areas. So a reduction in total crashes and a reduction in the speed-related crashes. So again, it's all about getting the message out and partnering with our law enforcement agencies. And how do we do that? Well, we do it through enforcement. You all know as well as I do that enforcement out there on our roadways, blue lights turned on the side of the road, especially those in law enforcement. You all know that the number one deterrent are the lights turned on the side of the road. You know as well as I do, even being in law enforcement, whenever I'm riding down the road and I see a cop on the side of the road that's got a car pulled over, what is the first thing that we do? We're going to take our foot off the gas and we're going to slow down a little bit. It's just habit. It's nature. It's what we've always done. It's what we're going to continue to do. And so that is our number one deterrent. So that's why we got, not only our South Carolina Highway Patrol, not only our state partners, but that's why we include our local partners, our municipalities and our sheriff's departments, and encourage them to do the enforcement with us. And not only that, but education. We all know that education plays a major component in everything that we do. And that's one thing we do a lot of out of our office. We are the highway safety office, so education is very important to us. And so we also partner, and we do billboards, we do social media, we do any and everything that we can related to education and being able to get these messages out. So there again, the speeding catches up with you up there on the top left corner of your screen there. That is a billboard that we did last year, across the state. And then of course the pedal to the metal, foot in the grave, that was another billboard that we do. Also include that in our social media platforms, and then those other ones as well. The speeding catches up with you. The one on the right, that was actually a video of a trooper stopping a vehicle, and things that we put out. But we don't only just do billboards, we don't only just do social media, but we also do gas station TV. Gas station TV is something that we brought back last year, and we started doing that more. And well, we've kind of gone away from, I guess, the traditional TV, the commercials and things like that, because I don't think we're hitting our target audience whenever we're doing those, because a lot of people are not watching TV anymore. A lot of people are focusing on, they stream. And so, but, one thing that, as far as gas station TV, unless you drive an electric vehicle, you have to stop at some point and get gas. So we're hitting a bigger audience. We feel whenever we're doing the gas station, TV ads and including those, along with, like I said, with our social media platforms and our billboards. And those are the educational components that we include, along with this campaign, whenever it comes. And then, so you can definitely follow us on social media. If there's some stuff that you see that we do, we're always looking to share information with other states, other partners. We're always looking to share and borrow things that you might be doing. We just borrowed an ad from the state of Utah on a thing that they did, a distracted driving commercial that they did. We reached out to them and we borrowed one of their campaigns or one of their ads that they just did. So we're always looking to partner with everybody else around the country, doing things together, because as well as I do, people are going to travel, people are going to drive, they're going to come through our jurisdiction, they're going to go through your jurisdiction. So our goal is the same across the country, is to making sure everybody gets to their destination safely. and to reduce these serious injury collisions, not only serious injury collisions, but reduce these collisions and reduce these fatalities that we're seeing on our highways. And our message is the same as everybody else. So with that, that is my information there. And I hope I was able to get this, information out to you. And if there's anything that we can do for you from the state of South Carolina, please don't hesitate to reach out to me either by phone or email. And we would love to partner with you and work with you or do anything that we can for you.
Thank you, Brent. Excellent presentation. We've got a couple questions for you. First is this one. Driver education and enforcement seem to dominate our discussion on this topic. And the poster is wondering, what about engineering? How do we bring this message to the feet of engineers? And do we need additional education and enforcement on that side? Is anything in your experience that might help shed some light on that one?
We have a great relationship with our Department of Transportation here in South Carolina. And that's where we rely a lot, of course, like everybody else, we rely on them for a lot of the engineering. But we also, any opportunity we get, we let our public know, whether it's through social media, well, not necessarily social media, but anytime I have the opportunity to speak in front of a group, we always let them know that if you see something in your area that may be causing a traffic problem and you think it might be a roadway issue or something, please let us know so that we can share it with our DOT partners, because they may not know. They may not know that there's an issue at a certain intersection somewhere in the state, or they may not know that there's a problem at a particular curve, or the signage may not be there. And that's one way that we do it here in South Carolina. Is we do have that great relationship with them. And matter of fact, we're fixing to partner with them to do a highway safety conference next year. So it's making sure that you do have that great relationship with your stakeholders and your state partners is what's helped us out a lot.
Yeah, I'm also curious, Brent, not to drag you down into that variable data question, because in some ways you've said you couldn't really put your finger on that. But since I'm sure you guys in South Carolina have been thinking about the sort of, the various elements of your strategy and the fact that you do have a multifarious approach to trying to attack the problem, I'm wondering which ones, in light of your experience and that data, do you think have been the most impactful, and which does South Carolina maybe think they want to take another look at or might need some tweaking as you see these, as you try to analyze this data and see what's going on the roadways?
Um, well, our main key is, if I understand your question correctly, our biggest thing is just making sure we have the right people at the table. And like I said, I feel, coming from the law enforcement side, I feel that uh, the most important regarding any message that we're doing, and don't, I hope I'm not saying this incorrectly or saying it wrong, but again, education, engineering, all of that is very important. But uh, you know, enforcement is the number one key when it comes to this data, in my opinion. Some may think otherwise, but without the enforcement, we know that this data is going to skyrocket. Without the enforcement, we know that our serious injuries and our fatalities are going to skyrocket. And I can show you. I mean, you just saw in the graph that, we did decrease our enforcement back in 2021, and you saw the what happened. And we have a great relationship with our law enforcement partners here in South Carolina. But to answer your question, whenever we did see the graph, and we did see, back in Southern slowdown to 24, 25, when we did see an increase in some things, I know I brag on our law enforcement partners, and it's kind of, some may think different when they see that graph, and we saw that increase. But there again, I don't know what happened during that time frame. I don't know what other agencies and what other law enforcement groups were doing during that time frame. It could have been, you know, most of our law enforcement agencies in South Carolina are less than 10 officers. We are a very rural state. If you're familiar with South Carolina, we have some large cities here, but not that many. And so we are a very rural state. And a lot of our agencies, probably 80% of the law enforcement agencies in South Carolina are less than 10 officers. So, and if your state is the same as South Carolina, you know that law enforcement is not on the top of a lot of people's list right now as far as wanting to be in law enforcement. We're struggling just like everybody else is across the country with keeping men and women to get out here and patrol the highways that we travel on every day. And so it could have been that, that could have been another reason during that time. So the key is for us to, you know, encourage our law enforcement officers to stay focused and to get out there and help us and participate in these campaigns that we do throughout the year. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
It really does, Brent. That's actually excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for this presentation. It was outstanding. We are going to pivot now to our final presentation in this session, where we will be hearing from Jacob B. Gonzalez. He is the Senior Land Use and Transportation Planner at the Washington State Department of Transportation, where he works at the intersection of land use, transportation, housing, and safety. He has 15 years of experience across local, regional, and state government and has presented at forums including the TRB boards, sessions, and the Washington Main Street. His work has also included public sector partnerships with the NYU Furman Center for Housing Solutions Lab, the National League of Cities, and the Urban Land Institute's Health Leaders Network. Jacob holds degrees from the University of Washington and Claremont Lincoln University. Jacob, welcome.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jacob Gonzalez. I'm a senior land use and transportation planner with the Washington State Department of Transportation. Today, I'll be talking about safer land use and how the Washington State Department of Transportation is beginning to integrate land use work into our safe system work, particularly in the context of roadway safety and speed. The main point I want to highlight is that land use it obviously does not replace traditional safety analysis, speed studies, engineering judgment analysis, or roadway design. It does not do that. But land use does help us better understand roadway context, who is using the road, what trips are being made, where people are crossing or turning, and where their road is functioning as a highway, a main street, a route for schools and school buses, a freight route, or all of those at once. Transportation safety outcomes are influenced by both speed and context. Rural areas account for a disproportionate share of traffic fatalities based on the population that they have. Speed is a major factor, obviously, in crash severity and survivability. And the safe system approach focuses not only on reducing total crashes, but on reducing fatal and serious injury outcomes as well. The piece I wanted to highlight on today is the context part. In many rural communities, highways also serve as local main streets, school routes, freight and agricultural corridors, or access routes for residents to meet their daily needs. And so land use helps us understand how these roads are actually functioning. At the Washington State Department of Transportation, we are looking at land use as one input among several for reducing fatal and serious injuries and fatalities. From an exposure perspective, land use helps us ask the question of how many trips are created by the development pattern, how far do people need to travel to reach their destinations and daily needs. Are local trips being forced or pushed onto higher speed roads because of the way streets and destinations and neighborhoods are designed? From a likelihood perspective, does the road design match the land use context? Are crossings, driveways, access points, curb cuts, etc.? Are the site design creating or reducing potential conflicts? And from a severity perspective, the questions become, are the modes separated where speeds are high and where they need to be separated? Does the roadway design help self-enforce the target speed? And does that target speed align with the surrounding development context? And so the takeaway here is that land use can help us understand the exposure and operating context, and certainly acknowledging that design, speed, management, and modal separation help influence the crash likelihood and severity. This is another way to show the connection between land use and the safe system connection. And so land use helps inform, again, the explosion and operating context, roadway design, speed management, modal separation, and compatible infrastructure are tied to likelihood and severity. And for exposure, land use can help us think about proximity, our housing, jobs, schools, services, parks, daily needs like healthcare, et cetera. Are these located in a way that reduces some trip lengths or supports more travel options? For likelihood, land use helps us understand whether transportation environment matches their surrounding uses. So if a road is serving schools, businesses, homes, clinics, or parks, does the design reflect that? For severity, land use helps us identify where lower target speeds, modal separation, or additional protection measures may be needed, especially where vulnerable users are present. So again, this is not about saying land use in any way solves safety by itself. It certainly doesn't do that. It is more about land use, using land use to help understand safety, speed, and design considerations earlier in the process. Why does land use matter for the Washington State Department of Transportation? This is one of my favorite slides and favorite topics here. And so why is WashDOT talking about land use? And the reality is that our agency owns and operates and maintains billions of dollars of public assets that are affected by land use decisions happening on a daily basis. The agency helps to fund and plan and participate in the permitting and delivering of projects that are shaped by the communities in and around them. Local land use decisions affect how people across the entire state of Washington access the state system, where growth occurs and how much traffic is generated, where people walk or bike, and how communities interact with the state highway network. So the Washington State Department of Transportation has a really unique opportunity to help support local land use and housing efforts and economic development efforts, public health, safety, and mobility goals through being a part of this coordinated planning and guidance process. And that is why land use matters for the Washington State Department of Transportation. It helps us better understand the context of which our transportation system is operating within. The origin of this work at the agency really connects back to the Washington State Strategic Highway Safety Plan and our Target Zero efforts. And this plan made an important point that transportation safety starts with how we build. And land use policies and regulations, these things influence how people get around and how safe those trips can be. Location matters as well. The design of neighborhoods, these things shape travel choices, the length of the trips, and the options available for folks to travel. That is the foundation for safer land use. It recognizes that transportation safety is much more than just about the roadway itself. It is also shaped by the places around the roadway and the underlying rules and regulations that produce those places. So what is safer land use? In short, safer land use acknowledges that transportation safety is not just a roadway design issue. It's shaped by development patterns and these rules and regulations that exist across our communities. This slide is intended to show sort of a simplified cycle demonstration of what that looks like. The policies shape regulations. These are the policies that either are coming from a county commission or a town council based on community input, ideally. These policies lead to the regulations that are codified or adopted into local codes. These regulations and codes shape the development itself. These developments shape what we see on a daily basis. These developments shape the street and the built environment. And then the built environment shapes the behavior, the way that we interact with what's been built around us. And then behavior contributes to the safety outcomes. So in practice, especially for any of you who've worked at the local level, this cycle is not always this clean. It oftentimes is not. These core pieces of policies and development and behavior and regulations and safety outcomes, these pieces interact consistently, constantly with each other, and many times in different orders. So the point is that local development rules and zoning and subdivision standards, the technical specifications in your public works standards and the regulations on things such as off-street parking and residential and commercial setbacks, access requirements, block design, These all influence the context that transportation agencies eventually have to design for and respond to. So I want to show a little bit more about using land use as a context indicator for safer speed. This slide is kind of intended to help translate land use into speed and design questions. And so when we think about a land use input, if the surrounding context includes homes and schools and parks, pharmacies and clinics, stores and civic uses like post office and city halls, this is going to indicate more local access as needed. There's going to be more crossings. There's going to be more turning movements, more walking and biking may be present. The speed and design question becomes, does the target speed on these roadway facilities reflect the users who are actually present? If we're observing a mix of commercial or residential developments that are fronting along a highway or a high-speed arterial, this is going to indicate sporadic driveway and curb cuts, conflict points, turning movements at higher speeds. And so the questions become more about access management, driveway spacing, crossing treatments. Are these things adequate for the uses that are fronting along the particular roadway facility? If the road is functioning as a main street or town center, then the road is not only a through route for regional traffic, it's also a place. It is a place that serves as a community gathering spot for the town. So the design question becomes whether that roadway communicates the lower speed environment as it transitions from rural travel to a more of a town main street environment. And we know that in rural communities, it's very common for farms and freight traffic and school buses and local traffic and users to share the exact same corridor. And that creates a mix of vehicle types and speeds and also expectations and experiences. And so the design questions become a little bit more complicated in whether the conditions, the frontage requirements, conditions, the shoulders, the access points, and the facilities provide adequate separation and protection for the diversity of uses on that facility. This is probably familiar to many people, obviously in this call, but we know that the same road in many rural communities serve regional and statewide movement while also providing local access for homes, to businesses, to schools, to services, and daily needs. And so we know that a state route or a county road may carry freight or agricultural trips. It may serve as a tourism route or an emergency response route, etc. At the same time, that very same road may serve as a community main street with schools and clinics, civic buildings, small businesses, churches, and parks, and homes fronting the roadway. And so the takeaway here is that the design should fit the actual context, not necessarily just a corridor label. I want to briefly talk about vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, proximity, and exposure. Vehicle miles traveled is often discussed in urban areas related to climate or congestion terms, but VMT can also help describe exposure for rural communities. When housing, jobs, schools, healthcare, and services are far apart, routine trips are going to take longer and they're going to be required more often. Those trips may also occur on higher speed roads with fewer alternative options. And for rural communities, this is a challenge that residents experience when they need to travel long distances to reach additional service or something like more specialized healthcare. Proximity does not eliminate the need for rural travel by any means, but it may reduce some routine trip distances and help explain exposure. The chart that you see, the graphic that you see here is from the University of California's Turner Center, and I thought it was useful because it looks at housing location and neighborhood VMT. So in the red shade are neighborhood are areas where the VMT is higher, and in the blue is areas where the VMT is lower. And you can see the different decades of how housing, not only the amount of housing, but kind of what type of VMT neighborhood housing has been built in. And so this is not being used it's not intended to be used as a safety outcome study. Rather, it can be used and helpful to help support a more narrow point about where housing is built influences how much people may need to drive as well. And so from a safe system perspective, that matters because VMT helps describe exposure, and exposure is one part of the safety picture. Where does land use show up in rural safety work? most, if not every jurisdiction, no matter the population, it has some set of regulations, a framework, or a code that regulates the development process. What gets built, how it gets built, where it gets built. It often shows up in the rules and standards that shape development before a project is ever built. And so zoning codes determine what uses are allowed, where they are allowed, how buildings relate to the street. It accounts for things like setbacks, lot size, lot width, lot depth, lot coverage, and off-street parking. Subdivision regulations shape how land is divided for new developments. They influence lots and blocks, street layout, and even connectivity. Engineering and public work standards determine how the infrastructure is built, including the cross sections, lane widths, the requirements for sidewalks, shoulders, curb gutter utilities, lighting, lumens, and construction materials. So these rules matter because they shape the roadway context that those working in transportation agencies and safety later need to respond to. They influence where access points are located. They influence where the streets connect or they don't, whether people have direct routes to daily destinations or not, and whether alternative transportation modes are available or feasible or not. And so the intent of this slide is to demonstrate sort of the underlying rules and regulations that are a primary input into so much of what we see surrounding our transportation context here. I wanted to highlight two smaller community examples. These communities may not have used the phrase safer land use, and these are not crash outcome case studies, but their code updates align with safer land use principles and concepts because they shape connectivity, housing, and the built environment. Ellensburg, Washington is a central Washington community located along Interstate 90. It has just under 21,000 residents, and it has recently changed the rules to allow more housing, more missing middle housing, which is happening across the country. But what they also did at the same time was update the subdivision design requirements to prioritize connected street networks, and they have maximum block lengths and facilities for pedestrians and bicyclists. And so the value from a safety perspective is not that the code alone solves safety outcomes. The value is that the code helps create a more connected and predictable development pattern that can support shorter local trips and safer multimodal options. Bastrop, Texas is a really interesting example. It's a smaller community in Texas with less than 10,000 residents. And they did something really exciting in 2023. They went through a comprehensive community outreach process and adopted an entire new code titled Building Bastrop. And the city used a form-based approach, which is different than traditional zoning and development design standards. It's based on form. And established the street grid as the framework for growth. It's very unique these days. And so the code integrated land use, transportation, environmental constraints into the development review process. And so, again, the point is not that the zoning reform automatically produces safer roads. That's not what we're saying. The takeaway, though, is that the development rules can shape the future transportation context. And so for agencies, again, that matters because those rules, they eventually show up as access points or crossing needs or frontage conditions or street connectivity or multimodal demand. From a WashDOT perspective, this connects directly to the work that our great team that does complete streets and active transportation work is doing. Safer land use is still relatively new for the agency, and it's a newer formal concept for us. But many teams and many staff have already been working with these ideas in practice, looking at context, access, active transportation, and for WashDOT, the way state highways function and interact with communities. So I wanted to highlight two examples from Odessa, Washington, and Shawila, Washington. These are not presented as completed safety outcome case studies. These are examples of how the agency is using to evaluate active transportation access and roadway context in some of our rural communities in Washington State. In Odessa, State Route 28 and 21 crisscross throughout the community. They run through the city. And this project is intended to rehabilitate both state routes within city limits. And so the safer land use connection is that the road is not only a regional route, it also serves as a primary local access corridor for residents and services, et cetera. And so from a speed and design perspective, questions about where should the roadway communicate that transition as it goes from a rural highway corridor serving a variety of higher speed traffic to a main street or a town center context that has active transportation needs. That's practical in the sense of bringing land use into the conversation. It helps identify where the function of the road changes and where the design may need to respond to that. Another example is Shawila, Washington. US 395 runs north-south through the community. The safer land use connection here is that a US highway still has to support local accesses and businesses and civic activity, while also serving as a major route for state travel. So the speed and design question is how to align these treatments with adjacent land use and local access needs while still maintaining regional movement. And that's a challenge that many rural communities face and experience. The goal is to look at the way we're doing things to try to make the road fit the context in which it is serving. This slide connects to the ongoing work at the Washington State Department of Transportation related to context-sensitive speed setting. So WSDOT is looking at how the built environment patterns can inform speed setting and speed management conversations across the state. That means asking how different roadway and land use contexts should influence target speeds, speed management approaches, and the types of protections that may be needed for the different users that are using these facilities. And as part of this as part of this effort, the agency is building a statewide map based on the built environment context. And this is one of the places where safer land use becomes a little bit more practical because it's connecting land use, roadway function, user experiences, and safer speed decisions. I want to talk a little bit about how safer land use is being integrated into WSDOT programs and planning efforts and reporting efforts. The safer land use is going to be a part of our upcoming amendment to the statewide highway system plan. It's also being integrated into our legislative work to reduce per capita vehicle miles traveled, where the Washington State Department of Transportation is continuing to evaluate the relationship between vehicle miles traveled, exposure, safety, and transportation outcomes. Safety and context are also part of WSDOT's work on multimodal level of service. This is a new legislative requirement where we are evaluating how to move beyond traditional vehicle-focused level of service measures and better account for, or more appropriately account for multimodal access, safety, and roadway context. Safer land use is directly connected to the ongoing context-targeted speed work that I mentioned, and most recently was included in the just published Safe System Approach for Speed Management, the handbook for local agencies in Washington State. It's also a topic that we are beginning to share with folks outside of our agency, share with local agencies, cities and counties across the state, jurisdictions, and also organizations, including those in public health or Main Street and economic development organizations. So the highlight here is that safer land use is not just a research or a presentation topic, it's starting to be embedded into WSDOT's work, which is really exciting. I wanted to end the presentation with just a couple of takeaways. First, land use, it helps WSDOT understand roadway context and how a road functions in connection with the surrounding development. Second is that this context helps identify safety, speed, and design questions earlier in the process. Third is the reality that local development regulations such as zoning, subdivision standards, design standards, complete streets policies, and public works requirements, these all provide an implementation pathway for better matching roadway context and the built environment context. And finally, land use is important, but it is one among several inputs. It does not replace safety analysis, as I started the presentation. It helps ask better questions earlier alongside traditional crash data, speed data, roadway geometry and access and traffic volumes, et cetera. Speed does not happen in isolation. It happens in a context. And so I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to share the work we're working on at the Washington State Department of Transportation. This is an evolving effort for our agency. We are continuing to learn and to research and to listen more about it. And we're certainly interested in how other Department of Transportations and just other agencies in general are accounting for land use from a safety perspective. So please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to continue that conversation. And just want to thank you all for your time and happy to answer any questions I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. I know we're right up against the end of this session, but we had a number of questions for you. I want to try to get to at least a couple of them. This one is interesting because it takes some of what a number of your slides and maybe looks at them from a different angle. A poster writes, at some point in time, a community may have established or developed along a roadway that has a design or posted speed limit of 55 miles an hour or more. How can the development along such a roadway be controlled to not degrade the functional intent of the roadway, such that the community request, for example, in establishing reduced speed zones that say approach 30 miles an hour, but the development doesn't support any speed that's say less than 45 or 50. So maybe taking it from the side of the development versus the roadway.
Yeah, and that's I think one of the key pieces or key components of sort of the safer land use framework is that the underlying regulations that private developments follow, those are the codes and regulations that are established at the local level. And so neighborhoods change, even rural communities experience change over time. And so if the function of a facility is the priority needs to change or it needs to remain the same depending on the priority, it sometimes the land use element doesn't necessarily get looked at as it needs to, but I would definitely suggest looking at what are the rules that are governing what is getting built, and if the access management standards for development along that particular corridor, if there's a gap between what those access management standards call for and what they need to account for given the corridor needs, then that needs to be addressed. And I think oftentimes what we'll find is that there's likely a gap in the standards we have in place and the goals and policies that a community may have, particularly on safety outcomes.
Yeah, thanks for that. Another quick one. Do you have any examples of poster rights from either municipal code or other examples that considers high injury networks when reviewing new developments or redevelopments?
I don't have any on top of mind, but I know that is becoming more prevalent in many communities and DOTs. I think that's going to be part of the next sort of iteration as we continue to think about safer land use is overlaying um, high injury networks or vulnerable road user assessments and try to understand the built environment context that surrounds them and how communities are addressing the gaps between regulations and standards or opportunities to address that. So I think that's part of the next iteration. As I mentioned, this is still very much an evolving effort. But that very much is work that we're interested in pursuing.
Yeah, last one. Thank you. Last one. A poster writes, prevailing speeds often reflect surrounding land use as drivers, naturally adjust to their own speeds based on context. How do you think a deeper analysis of land use might support the development of safe and reasonable speed limits?
I think that ties back to the last question. I think that's part of the next phase of this work is to now that we've established right that there's a role for land use in the safety conversation is to look deeper into the technical regulations regarding spacing, block lengths, offset intersections, et cetera, setbacks for development, and to look at things like site design and to understand the relationship those have to high injury networks or vulnerable road user assessment. So I think that's part of the next iteration of where we're hoping to take safer land use is to tie these things together based on what we can measure.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. And thank you once again for your presentation. It was very interesting and eye-opening. For the rest of you, very quickly, here is a sense of where we go from here. There's a 30-minute break between now and 3 p.m. Eastern. At 3 p.m., my colleague Kevin Elliott will be leading you through the last session of the day on post-crash care in the rural context. Now, remember, that is a separate link. This link will shut down as soon as this meeting is over, so you want to log back in. If you haven't registered for that, please head over to our website. It's right there on the front page. You'll be able to register very quickly and get into that excellent presentation, I am sure. Until then, thank you so much for attending this particular session. Thank you to our presenters for excellent and stimulating presentations, and to you for asking some great questions and being great participants. We hopefully will see you in about 26 minutes.